You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave.
This is a story about an encounter my mum had and is 100% true to her recollections. Some background. During this time I was probably around 16. Me, my mum and sister lived in a hotel/B&B, whatever you want to call it. My mum was the owner at the time. The property itself is made up of two very old Victorian period houses joined together. The front entrance would lead to the main road, and the back entrance would lead to what was almost an alley between the two houses, before leading out to a rear car park. We've all had different experiences around the property. You know, the usual stuff, like being in a room and feeling uncomfortable, like someone is there with you. Bangs and creaks on old wooden floorboards. Things going missing then turning back up. You know, the usual stuff. The night of the encounter, so it was around 10 to 11 at night. I think there would have been a huge event happening in the city where we lived at the time. The hotel was fully booked and my mum was waiting for the final check-in of the night. My mum was expecting a party of 4, and we just so happened to have a room with 2 double beds, 2 couples basically. Around the time of 10 to 11 p.m, she received a phone call from the party. They had arrived and were in the car park asking where the entrance was. My mum said she'd come meet them, as it was dark and guests like people to go that extra mile, even for a bed and breakfast. So my mum gets up from the kitchen, heads through the dining room. To the left you'd have the front door, and to the right you'd have the main landing area, stairs and a little walkway to the back door. So she approaches the back door and heads down the walkway. A small boy in a blue and white striped hooded t-shirt and shorts with short blonde hair runs past her, like brushes past, the way my mum described it, ran up the landing and headed up the stairs, stomping his feet. It was late at night and my mum wasn't amused, as she thought this party of 4 hadn't bothered to tell her they were bringing their child. So she thought she'd have to set up another bed. We used to keep some fold-out beds with mattresses and sheets if we ever got extra guests, and was quite rightly annoyed at this party. She goes to greet this party of 4, and after a while of chatting whilst checking in the guests, she told the guests something along the lines of, "Oh, I wish you had told me a little earlier you was bringing your son. I haven't got an extra bed set up in the room yet." And, as you've probably guessed, the 2 couples looked at each other quite perplexed before responding to my mum, something along the lines of, "We haven't brought a child with us, it's just us." My mum quite coolly checked the guests in before running to bed. She slept with the lights on that night.
I checked into this hotel room with family Friday night. It's now very, very early on Sunday. A dream I had woke me up, and since I can't go back to sleep, I'm posting here. I'll start off by saying I'm generally not plagued by nightmares, and I definitely don't have auditory hallucinations. Last night, laying down to go to sleep, I've been hearing whispers. I thought I was just tired, but now I think it's something more. Yesterday, my mom said I was crying out in my sleep. I was having nightmares that night. About half an hour ago, I woke up sobbing, soaked in my own tears. I had just witnessed my daughter's death and attended her funeral in extreme detail. For reference, I do have a daughter. She's 1.5 and asleep next to me. In my dream, she was murdered by a bomb of some sort that hurt others, but she was first impact. And if that wasn't heartbreaking enough, at her funeral, she was just walking around like normal. The funeral itself was weird, as there wasn't many people, and I know for a fact a lot would come to my daughters. She was holding the hand of someone, but when she noticed me, she smiled and ran over. I picked her up and smelled the top of her head, as I often did in real life, and was heartbroken to realize she now smelled like embalming fluid. So I took a picture with her to capture one last memory. When I looked at it, I realized I was sitting alone. All that combined really solidified that she was really gone. It's hard to describe the feelings of hopelessness, despair, and gut-wrenching profound sadness that are still lingering. I just want to say I am so sorry if you ever lost a child. I can't imagine your pain, and I'm sending you all the love. I texted my friend about it, and she definitely believes it's haunted. That thought hadn't even crossed my mind until she mentioned it.
I love posting about my hometown because most of the stories have lots of historical info to add to the story. Having tons of info about these places that aligns with actual documented events makes things more interesting in my opinion. Here, there are a few nameless ghosts with no backstory or origin. After I posted my last story about my lovely town of Santa Fe, in the comments I had someone bring up another place on my list, so I decided that it'd be the next story I'd tell you guys. This is a very sad, tragic story, and also happens to be one of my personal favorites. La Posada is a very beautiful and very old resort and spa. They offer lots of services for the folks who might be a little heavier in the pockets. There's one, however, who stays here without paying a cent. I mean, she is the lady of the house after all. Abraham Stab was an ambitious young man from Germany. His brother, Zadok, and himself decided to come to Santa Fe, New Mexico to start a trading business in 1854. They were successful in their endeavors and accumulated a large fortune. About 10 years later, in 1865, Abraham returned to Germany for one thing. Julia Schuster was a young, beautiful and refined German girl, and she was to be Abraham's bride. They were married in Germany. After celebrating their nuptials and getting some affairs in order, they traveled back to Santa Fe, so Abraham could not only continue his business, but so they could start their new, luxurious life. When arriving, Abraham showed his love for his young bride by building her a grand French Second Empire mansion beyond her wildest dreams. It was one of the biggest homes in Santa Fe at the time, and they spent no time at all filling it with children and guests, as Julia rapidly became a prominent socialite and a mother of 7. Their stature made them well-respected people in society and led to Abraham becoming the first president of the Chamber of Commerce. If the story ended here, it would be a happily ever after story. However, the Stabs' good fortune and happy life would shatter. Although it might not have been as happy-go-lucky as it seemed, behind their huge parties and well-respected image is rumored to be abuse and neglect. Some say Abraham wasn't a very good husband, like many men of the time. To them, a woman was property, and striking their wives wasn't something they hesitated to do. Not long after Julia had her 8th child, the infant died. Julia became extremely depressed, and the depression only worsened when she suffered from several miscarriages. It's said her hair rapidly and prematurely turned white, and her mind was slipping fast. She apparently retired to her boudoir for the remainder of her short life and completely lost her mind. In 1896, at the age of 52, Julia couldn't take her suffering anymore and took her own life. Years later, in 1913, Abraham died as well. The Stab mansion continued to be filled with guests as they built around the mansion and turned the entire estate into what was and still is La Posada Resort and Spa. Booked to full capacity year-round as one of the most popular places to stay in town, its history hasn't affected the flow of people staying there. I mean, Julia doesn't run guests off. However, it's said she sometimes runs off employees. I know several people who have in fact worked at the La Posada, my father being one of them, and they've all told me the same story. When being hired in any position at the La Posada, your training manager gives you a rose. They proceed to take you up to the 2nd floor of the main house, the Stab mansion itself, to Julia's boudoir. There, you are to leave the rose on her windowsill and introduce yourself to Julia. It's said that if this is not done, she will make you quit in one way or another, taking the lack of introduction and gift as a sign of disrespect. Yes, the manager can hire you, but Julia is the one who really decides if you stay. Of course, the help must show the lady of the house the utmost respect. That hasn't changed since Julia was alive. My dad was hired as a server in the restaurant many years ago. He had a couple of strange things happen when he worked there. One night the bar was buzzing with the sound of patrons drinking, dining and being social. There was a man sitting at the bar who was acting belligerent. The bartender was a woman who worked there for some time, and I imagine Julia took a liking to her, maybe was even protective of her. The man was being very disrespectful to her bartender when, all of a sudden, his glass flew off the bar behind him. Many people witnessed the glass of something or another be thrown, all of them in shock. Another time my dad was working the late shift. He was doing his side work and getting his area ready for tomorrow. The bar was empty as it was closing time. When he saw her, she was standing on the stairs in her red dress. The red dress is what she's usually seen wearing, just standing there, looking over the railing, and as quickly as she appeared, she was gone. I'm sure to this day people hear her singing lullabies to her lost child, or see her walking the corridors of her beloved home. And perhaps she's still putting people who deserve it in their place. So, if you come to Santa Fe and decide to stay at the resort and get a massage, be respectful and keep your eyes out for the red dress.
In 2016, my girlfriend and I decided to go on our first vacation together. We booked a 3-night stay at the Belmont Hotel, which was a historic hotel in the old part of the city. It was an elegant manor-style home from the 1850s, and parts of the property looked to be from that period. Massive staircases, parlor room, and original furniture throughout. Our first day, we did the usual touristy stuff. Exhausted, we settled into our room and crashed for the evening. Our first night, we barely slept. My girlfriend and I were both uncomfortable sleeping in the room and felt like someone was watching us. A few hours later, around 3 a.m., we were abruptly woken up to a very loud sound coming from above our room. It sounded like someone was pulling or pushing a large piece of furniture. The stuttering of wood on wood and the creaking was unbearably loud. This went on for so long that we were fully awake, thinking someone was working upstairs like a staff member moving furniture or rearranging the room. We were both dumbfounded, sitting upright in our beds, waiting for this to end. The second day, more touristy stuff. Didn't think much of the previous night. The second night, we were exhausted and went to sleep early. This night was strangely similar. We woke up around the same time to the exact same creaking and stuttering of furniture or something being moved around above us. It eventually stopped like yesterday, and we managed to fall back asleep. Next thing I remember is my girlfriend waking me up abruptly saying, "What are you doing?" I awoke, standing in the middle of the room in the dark, unpacking my bag, angrily throwing our clothes into the air. I snapped at her for asking me what I was doing and interrupting me. I was frustrated and agitated on waking. Suddenly, I vaguely remember what I was doing, almost like a dream on waking, and you try to hang on to your dream. I sat on the bed and explained that I was looking for a key in the room, and remembered wandering around the room, desperately searching the walls, floors, and furniture with my hands in the dark. I was getting more disturbed the more I explained this to my girlfriend. The idea I was alone in this dark hotel room doing this really frightened me because I had no control. Needless to say, we decided to call it early, head home, and end our vacation. We drove the full 4-hour drive home that night in pitch darkness and fog. I called the hotel that morning to check out early. Speaking with the front desk, I mentioned the loud noises coming from above our room. She replied, "There is no room above yours. It's an attic space and no staff would be there at that time." I mentioned that it sounded like someone was dragging furniture on hardwood. She said there was lots of furniture stored up there. I asked her if the hotel was haunted. She responded reluctantly that she had heard other, similar stories.
This happened about 9 or 10 years ago, and it's something I've never figured out, and maybe something I'll never figure out, but it's stuck with me all this time. Let me preface this by saying I get sleep paralysis. I've had more instances of sleep paralysis than I can count, but I'll say an average of 4 times a year for the past 30 years. Some years it's more often, some years it's less, but by the time this experience occurred, I was well versed enough to be able to identify when it's happening, and to be able to pull myself out of it. Generally, when I get sleep paralysis, I can hear everything around me, but I can't move or make a noise. I've never seen the old hag, and only once have I seen the man in the wide-brimmed hat. He had red eyes when I saw him. And yes, he was pushing down on my chest. Not cool, not fun. Never want that to happen again. But I also knew he wasn't real as it was happening. So 1% of the time I've had visual hallucinations. Normally, it's just that I can't move or speak and can hear everything around me and somehow see the room even though my eyes are shut. But this doesn't fit the mold of sleep paralysis. At least, not in any way I've ever experienced it. That's why it bothered me so much then, and it still bothers me now. My son was young at the time, 5 or 6. My then husband, now ex, and I drove to visit my grandmother for Christmas. She lives about 100 miles away from me. She has 2 extra bedrooms, but other family members scooped up the extra rooms before we could, so my husband and I rented a hotel room a few miles from our house. It was something like a Best Western or Holiday Inn. If I had to guess, I would say at the time it was less than 10 years old. We checked into our hotel room quickly, dropped our stuff off and went straight to my grandmother's house. We had Christmas dinner with the family. I don't think I had any alcohol at all. If I did, maybe a glass of wine, but that's it. It was a long drive down to her house, 2 hours at least. And then an eventful evening, so we were beat. We left Grandma's house around probably 9 p.m. and headed back to the hotel room. We drove around for an extra 20 minutes, trying to get our cranky son to sleep, which made me even more exhausted. The exhaustion is the thing that had me thinking maybe this was sleep paralysis because that usually triggers it for me. But again, what happened next is like nothing I've ever experienced before or since. The layout of the room is, the hotel room door opened up to a little hallway and directly to the left is the bathroom with a tiny closet next to it. Moving just past the hallway, the wall on the left turned 90 degrees and the beds were to the left. To the right, you could follow the wall straight to the corner. There was a dresser along that wall, and in the corner was an armchair. From that corner, follow that wall, and there was a window facing the parking lot, and in the next corner, there was another armchair maybe 3 feet from the head of one of the queen beds. That was where my husband and I slept. My husband slept on the side, near the armchair, and I slept on the inside so I could be closer to our son in the other bed. So we're exhausted. My son fell asleep in the car. I tucked him in and very quickly got changed and got into bed. My husband got in bed only moments later and I shut the lights off. Before I fell asleep, I observed that the light from the parking lot peeked in over the top and around the sides of the window curtain. It was brighter than I would have imagined with the curtain drawn, but I was too exhausted for it to bother me. I passed out quickly. Sometime in the middle of the night, I hear the click of a door handle turning, the lever kind. I was alarmed, but my body was still heavy with sleep. I'm also facing the direction of the door. I watch as the orange light from the hotel hallway slides across the wall opposite of me, and then slowly disappears as the door closes again, quietly. I felt like I was passing in and out of sleep, so the sight of this almost had a strobing effect. A young man, wearing medium blue baggy jeans and no shirt, walks past the ends of our beds. At this point, I'm more alert but laying in bed trying to figure out if this is real or not, because it is so vivid. But I also have this feeling I was passing in and out of consciousness still. From the moment I heard the click of the door handle, I'm scared out of my mind, but still so tired. I want to get up. I want to scream, but I can't tell what is holding me in bed. Is it fear or exhaustion? At this point, the man is behind me. I can feel him looking at me, but I'm absolutely terrified to turn over. If I turn over, is it going to spook him and he'll attack my family? Right now, I can tell he's not moving, just looking. I finally feel alert enough and realize my eyes are closed. What? But I can feel him in the room. It was the scariest thing I've ever done because I might be facing an attacker in my hotel room, but I force my eyes open and turn over. Nothing. There's no one in the room. My heart is racing. It was so real. I look at my husband, and he's fast asleep with his back turned to me, snoring gently. My son is asleep. Everything is how it was when I fell asleep. I'm still on my back, looking at the armchair in the corner, at the end of the beds with the soft white light of the parking lot falling onto the chair as I calm down enough to fall back asleep. I can't tell you how much time passed, but it was dark, and then all of a sudden, I can see the armchair in the corner at the foot of the bed again. But this time the man that entered the room earlier is sitting in it. With the light shining from the window, I can see him a little better. It's a soft light, but I can tell his hair is buzzed short, and it's a dark brown. He looks young, maybe 18 to 25. He's either white with a tan or maybe Hispanic. I can't see his face features too well, but he could be a model. I don't know celebrities well enough to be able to compare him to someone, but he has strong cheekbones, sort of a perfect straight nose, and a strong jaw. It's too dark to see details, just his silhouette. He's sitting there, calmly, staring at me. He doesn't feel threatening or menacing, but I'm still scared out of my mind, because there's a guy in my room, in the middle of the night, staring at me. This time, the line between asleep and awake is even blurrier in my head. Am I asleep? Are my eyes open? I don't know, but I'm afraid to find out. I can feel my husband asleep next to me, so I decide the best move is to try to discreetly wake my husband. He's still snoring with his back turned to me, but my hand is on the bed next to his back, so I decided to slowly move my hand closer to his back and poke him. I poked him a few times, but he is passed out and not reacting at all. I was so pissed. He's dead to the world. Finally, I decided, F this, I'm not dealing with this alone anymore, and turn towards my husband slightly and lift myself on my elbow. And I'm about to grab his arm and shake the hell out of him when I notice the man is no longer in the chair anymore. Now I feel freaking crazy. What is going on? Where is this guy? Is he real or not? I am so tired, confused, frustrated, and scared. This man feels real. The details are so vivid, but as I'm trying to sift through what is reality and what isn't, I realize I think I can only see or feel this guy when I'm asleep. I pray to myself that this is the end of it. I'm trying to convince myself that this is just my brain, creating an elaborate, lucid dream, and I'm safe. It should stop now because this is just a stupid dream, and I finally realized it. I roll towards my husband, facing his back. I close my eyes and start to drift off to sleep. I swear, it was only a few minutes later, and this time I can't see anything, but I feel the guy looking at me. But this time while sitting in the chair that's 3 feet away from my husband's head. I open my eyes. No one is there. For the rest of the night, I probably woke up every hour or so. Every time I fell asleep, I could feel this man's presence in the room. He never tried to hurt us. He just watched us all night. When I finally saw daylight through the curtains, I got up and woke my husband up and told him we had to leave. I tried not to alarm him or my son. I just got them up and dressed, and I think we're out of the hotel room by 7:30 a.m. The whole thing had a surreal quality to it because, with the exception of a few distinct moments, it was hard to tell when my eyes were open and when they were closed, when I was fully conscious and when I was maybe semi-conscious. There were parts that I could write off as a dream, if they weren't so damn vivid. And the whole night, the lingering feeling of being watched, even when I couldn't see him. Every time I recount this incident to myself or someone else, I'm no closer to understanding what happened. I refuse to go back to that hotel, though.
The Drury Inn is a fairly new hotel in the downtown area of Santa Fe, New Mexico. They only opened in the last 10 years or so. However, the building that is now the Drury Inn has been there for quite some time. This hotel used to be the original St. Vincent's Hospital, being the only hospital in Santa Fe for a very long time. The old St. Vincent's Hospital has more than its fair share of horror stories and resident ghosts. So the fact that it is now a luxury hotel is mind-boggling to me. I'll be honest, I personally would never lay my head there, even if I did have the money. Where to begin? I guess I'll tell the more mild of the two most well-known events at the hospital. During a late winter night, a young and fairly new nurse was working in the 3rd floor nurse station. Going about her duties, she heard a child's crying coming from down the hall from where she was. She walked the hall till she was standing in front of room 311. This is where the crying was coming from. When she opened the door to see, the crying stopped. No one was set up in this room at the time, so of course she was very confused. She thought maybe she misheard where it was coming from, so she went around and checked her other rooms, yet every patient was in fact asleep. As she went back to the nurse station, from behind her, she heard it once again, the painful crying of a young child. She swiftly walked back to room 311. When she got to the door, she flung it open and flipped on the lights, but of course the crying stopped once more. She even went as far as to check under the bed, but yet again, nothing. Trying to calm herself, she went to the nurse's station to sit down. For a little while, it was silent until the crying began again. Imagine how she felt being a nurse, a person who genuinely wants to help people, and hearing a helpless baby crying in pain, yet you cannot help. So again, she walked to 311, and yet again, the crying stopped as soon as she opened the door. The next night, she came in to work her shift and caught a couple of nurses before they left. She told them about her eventful night, and their faces changed. They told her that everyone who worked the night shift on the 3rd floor heard the crying, and it picked up in the winter, especially around Christmas time. They told her to just ignore it, and for a little while, she didn't even hear the crying until Christmas Eve. She knew from the beginning that it was a baby, as she had worked with babies in the hospital before, and to her, the cry a baby makes when it is in pain was unlike anything else, and unfortunately was burnt into her memory. So for a while, she listened to the crying, and that's when the cry turned into the sound of a baby gasping for air. It was a sound she also knew. The sound was of a baby taking its last breaths. A week later, she mentioned the event to some co-workers as they had dinner. One of the other nurses at the table told her she had been on duty on the 3rd floor on Christmas Eve a few years prior. She said there was a bad car accident on the highway. In one of the cars was a father and his infant little boy. The dad died on the scene, and they rushed the baby to the hospital, which, may I add, is quite a long drive from the highway that the crash had taken place. Apparently the little boy was suffering from internal bleeding. It was only a couple of hours later that the poor angel succumbed to his injuries. The nurse said she still remembered hearing the little boy take his last breaths, that they were rough and deep. The fairly new nurse asked which room the baby had died in, and of course, it was room 311. I wonder if the Drury Inn rents 311 out during the holidays. I mean, it seemed to already be occupied. This is truly a heartbreaking tale of the old building that I can only imagine holds many like this. However, on the other side of the spectrum, this building holds something much darker. Every haunted place has its hotspot. For the old St. Vincent's Hospital, that spot is the basement. People have reported experiencing many things in the basement. Disembodied voices and screams, things being banged on and crashing, seeing shadow people, and not only being touched, but being yanked, pushed, and pulled by their clothes and hair. This could be your normal run-of-the-mill haunting, right? However, people have also reported hearing low, guttural growls, moaning, being scratched. And probably most scary is, more than a couple of people have reported seeing blood dripping from down the walls. Many will tell you there's no ghost in the basement, rather a demonic presence. They naturally use the space for storage, so staff didn't venture down there often. It's safe to say that every time someone went down there, they experienced something. At one point, when it wasn't a public hospital anymore, it was used as a nursing home. I don't know what made the nursing home staff less cautious than the hospital staff, but they took the rumors of the basement as an opportunity of sorts to scare each other. Anytime they had a new hire, they'd wait till nightfall and take the newbie down the service elevator to the basement. It was almost like a hazing ritual. They'd take them down, and when they'd reach the basement, they'd make the new nurse get out. They'd leave them with no flashlight in the dark, unfamiliar place and tell them to find the staircase and meet them back on the 3rd floor. The lights in the basement didn't work at all for some reason or another, and the only light source that would be down there would be an exit sign. On top of that, the basement has been described as maze-like. Huge building equals huge basement. One night, after training a new nurse's aide, one of the other nurses was given the responsibility of escorting the new nurse down the elevator to the basement so she could complete her initiation. They reached the bottom. She wished the girl good luck and reminded her to meet them back at the 3rd floor. She went back to the 3rd floor nurse's station to wait for her. After about an hour, she started to wonder where she was. Even if she got lost, she should already be able to find her way and make it back up. She decided to go find her. However, she was scared to go alone, so she convinced another nurse's aide to go with her. When reaching the bottom, she got out to look for her, while the nurse's aide kept the elevator doors open to shed some light, although it didn't help much. Luckily, she did have a flashlight. She started searching the rooms and then calling for the girl's name when she heard a very quiet reply off in the distance. She yelled out to the aide that she thinks she found her and to wait for them. She went in the direction she heard her and found the poor girl, balled up in the corner of a big dusty room, quivering in fear behind an old filing cabinet. She helped the girl up and began leaving when she noticed something strange on the wall of the room. It was some kind of liquid. She ran her fingers down the wall to further examine the strange substance. It covered her fingers. Having nothing to wipe it off with and wearing her white uniform, she let it dry on her hands. When they reached the elevator, she looked down to find her fingers were covered in what appeared to be blood. And when she smelled it, it was that unmistakable iron smell. That's when she began to panic, not wanting to be on that floor another second. They all stayed frightful long after they made it back up to the station. After the new aide calmed down enough, she told them what happened to her. She had began trying to find the stairs, but kept bumping into things as it was so dark. She started hearing things behind her that sounded like small taps and then thuds. That's when she heard the growls coming from seemingly right behind her head. She took off running until she landed in her little spot where they found her. Later that night, the maintenance man overheard them talking about the experience and chimed in. Apparently he had been the maintenance man there for a while, even back when it was still a hospital. He said that the hospital staff used to use the furnace in the basement to cremate organs removed in surgeries and even amputated limbs. I believe that all the energy the staff put into being scared of the basement only intensified the activity down there. Supposedly after this happened, the nursing home staff never carried out another initiation. Not too long after the nursing home shut down and the building was left vacant for some time. In my teens, it was covered in graffiti and had many busted out windows. It was well known among my age group that the teens would break into the building to party, explore, and probably see if they experienced anything paranormal. A couple of times my friends and I would sit outside the building on the steps and attempt to hold spirit box sessions, and we'd capture words like hospital, dead, pain, meds, and help. A couple times I swear I had seen figures in the windows next to the huge double door entrance. Now do you understand how crazy it is to me that this is the very building that is now a luxury hotel? And also why I was not surprised reading the article in the paper that detailed a family staying there and being messed with all night long by an unseen force? Maybe if they'd done some research. But then again, I look at the building now and there's honestly no resemblance to the once booming hospital, and a simple Google search on its current name won't spark much suspicion. Only when digging deeper with the original name when you uncover the past. Luckily you guys have me, so you won't have any surprises if you decide to book a room there. So if you decide to blow the bank and stay in a luxury hotel in Santa Fe, New Mexico, make sure your room isn't on the 3rd floor and stay far away from the basement. Unless that's the kind of thing you're looking for.
For the past 2 weeks, my family and I have been traveling around various countries in Europe. Unfortunately, we had our passports stolen in Belgium and had to make a couple of last-minute changes to our plans, one of which included booking a hotel in a new city for one night. We stopped just for the night between trains in Cologne, Germany. I helped my parents find the last-minute reservation online, and it was a pretty standard apartment-style rental. When we arrived at the rental, we were all impressed by the views of the nearby cathedral and church spires, the shingled roofs, just the general feel of history that the whole town had. We went out for dinner and came back after dark, all heading to bed for our early train the next morning. I shared a room with my little brother, and my parents slept in the next room over. I remember asking them if we could swap rooms because I didn't like the layout of ours. There was too many doors for me to feel comfortable. I have a weird thing where I don't like sleeping near doors, and I can't sleep in a room with any doors left open. Anyways, they said no, we could just stay in the original room, which had doors to the kitchen, hallway, and 2 closets. I was too tired to push it, and I figured my fatigue would override my personal habits, so I just got ready for bed and tried to go to sleep. While I was sleeping, I remember having some cycles of regular dreams. Then, all of a sudden, I woke up within another dream. I was lying in the same bed in the exact same room, and my little brother was lying in the same bed too. It felt exactly like if we had just woken up normally. Now, I have very vivid dreams sometimes, but I never dream about being in the exact room I'm in, and I never wake up to a dream within a dream. In this dream, I was sitting up in bed, and so was my brother. I could feel that for some reason, we were both really scared, and there was this charged and anxious feeling in the room. I remember my little brother saying, "What time is it? Get out your flashlight." At the same time, we were both looking at the far end of the room where it was darker and away from windows. It was like we were both too scared to speak, but I could feel that we were both sensing whatever dark energy was at the end of the room. I started to fumble for my phone flashlight, just for some light, when all of a sudden this thing, the closest I can describe it as is a dark blob of energy, moved super quickly over next to my side of the bed, and my brother and I screamed at the same time as this thing rushed up next to me. That's exactly when I woke up for real, around 2:30 a.m. My heart was racing, and I was sweating so hard despite the room not being hot. I was so unsettled that I turned on all the lights in the room and didn't sleep for about 2 more hours until I could finally somewhat relax and drifted back to sleep. This experience was very disturbing for me. I never wake up early in the morning for no reason, as I usually sleep through the night and rarely, if ever, have nightmares. Now, I am wondering if anyone can comment on a phenomenon like this. Can people have paranormal encounters in their sleep while in certain spaces? Was I just having a vivid dream, or was that experience a signal that there was something in that space? Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.